the throne of silence. The palace of Arkai had been built not with stone nor with metal, but with the luminous bones of extinct leviathans that once roamed the oceans of Zoraya. Their ivory frames arched like cathedral spires, glowing faintly with a bioluminescent memory, as if the dead giants themselves bore witness to the life of the one who ruled beneath them. King Aurelion, the 47th of his line, lay upon his final bed within that skeletal cathedral, his breath shallow, the glow of his eyes dimming to embers. His body was vast compared to his heirs, carved by centuries of selective binding, his shoulders wider than a starship's hatch, his chest like a collapsed sun. The galaxy had called him the breaker of chains and the silent anvil, for he had ruled with the dignity of inevitability. To resist him was to resist gravity itself, and yet now, gravity failed him. Around him gathered his heirs, 6 sons, 2 daughters, and a circle of advisors draped in silver robes that shimmered like liquid starlight. The air was thick with ceremonial incense, its fragrance metallic, sharp as though the palace itself bled in grief. Outside, the skies boiled with a storm summoned not by weather, but by tradition, the death winds that every monarch of Arkai was said to bring when their life force seeped into the atmosphere. Aurelion's lips moved, and his children leaned closer, their faces carved with a pride that had never known defeat. Princes whose armor still smelled of conquest, princesses whose voices commanded fleets without question, each believing themselves destined to inherit not only the throne, but the unquestionable right to rule. His whisper rasped like dry branches snapping underfoot. Fear. Humanity. The words fell into the chamber like stones into a bottomless well. The eldest son, Veilor, lifted his chin. Humanity? He murmured, almost amused. The soft-skinned creatures of Sul? They have no throne, no crowns, no chains of legacy. They are a fractured breed, father. Aurelion's hand trembled as he raised it, an old colossal claw still capable of silencing his brood. His voice, weak but sharp, cut through their arrogance. They kill kings, but they raise leaders. The chamber stilled. The storm outside clawed at the palace walls as if echoing his words. Aurelion's eyes, dim as dying suns, searched each of their faces. Remember me, not for what I conquered, but for what I feared, for I feared them. His voice broke, then steadied in a whisper that carried the weight of galaxies. You do not yet understand, but you will. When the stars weep over me, you will see. And then, silence. The last king of Arkai exhaled his final breath, and with it the storm outside unleashed its fury. The leviathan bones groaned, lightning tore across the skies, and for a moment it seemed the very world would shatter under the grief of his passing. The heirs remained unmoved, their pride shielding them from his warning. Humanity? They thought of them as scattered ants gnawing at crumbs of power in their spiral arm of the galaxy. Ants could never threaten the wolves of Zoraya, but king's words are not thrown into the void. They are seeds, and seeds bloom in ways no air ever anticipates. The funeral of a monarch of Arkai was unlike any spectacle in the galaxy. For 7 suns and 7 moons the world would not sleep. Oceans would burn with ritual fire. Mountains would sing as seismic drums cracked their peaks in rhythmic mourning. The body of the monarch would be elevated not in soil nor tomb, but on a floating bier of crystal that hovered above the palace, lit from beneath by the energy of the planet's core. It was at such a funeral, under such cosmic ceremony, that the words of Aurelion began their echo, for among the envoys who arrived, diplomats from empires, priests from dying stars, warlords with trophies dangling from their belts, there walked beings unassuming, unadorned, unarmed, their skin pale, their eyes restless, their stature fragile compared to the armored titans around them. Humans. They had not come with fleets. They had not come with weapons. They had not even come with demands. They came as witnesses, clothed in black garments that bore no insignia of empire. They moved with quiet grace through the colossal halls of bone, bowing neither too deeply nor too shallow, speaking only when spoken to. The heirs noticed them with scoffs. Veilor muttered to his sister Zira, "They look as though a stiff wind would carry them away." Zira smirked. Perhaps that is why father spoke of them with fear. He always did admire the fragile, but others, the advisors, the keepers of the old chronicles, watched the humans differently, for they knew whispers carried across the galaxy. that in the last century alone humanity had torn down empires not with fire, but with thought. That they had shattered tyrannies not by killing rulers alone, but by birthing something rarer, leaders who commanded not with crowns, but with conviction. The humans did not bow to the bier. They stood still, their heads lowered in silence as though they grieved not a monarch but the idea of mortality itself. And in that moment, though the heirs laughed at them, the advisors felt the first stirring of Aurelian's prophecy. For when a king dies, the universe shifts its weight. And in the shifting, the smallest creatures can move mountains. That night, as the seventh moon rose and the bier glowed brighter than the sun's, the heirs gathered in secret halls to speak of succession. Their voices clashed like steel. Some demanded immediate coronation, others called for conquest to mark their inheritance, and still others plotted shadows within shadows. But outside their chamber, the humans sat in silence. They did not argue. They did not plan coups. They merely watched. And as they watched, the storm winds carried Aurelian's words through the night like a whisper that would not die. They kill kings. But they raise leaders. The heirs scoffed. But the galaxy was already listening, and soon it would show them the truth. The funeral of suns. The skies of Zariah had always been restless, but on the seventh day of morning, they split into rivers of light. The oceans glowed crimson from the burning oils poured across their surface, and mountains thundered with ritual drums that cracked their very roots. The bier of King Aurelian hovered above the palace of Leviathans, his vast body wrapped in the silken shrouds of starlight, his crown fused into the crystals of his coffin. He did not look like a corpse. He looked like a star carved into the shape of a monarch, waiting to rise again. The heirs stood below the bier, arranged by age and pride, their armor gleaming with the insignias of their campaigns. Around them, the galaxy's dignitaries filled the skeletal arches of the palace. Insectoid chieftains with wings folded like blades, aquatic priests who walked in shimmering exosuits dripping brine, emissaries of empires whose shadows fell across entire sectors. Each had come not merely to mourn but to measure the strength of Aurelian's legacy, the ambitions of his children, the cracks in the throne of Archi, and among them, like shadows unnoticed yet immovable, stood the humans. They bore no banners. They claimed no seats of prominence. They stood at the edges, clad in black fabric that held no symbols, no weapons, no ornaments. Their stillness was almost unnerving in a hall alive with the restless energy of predators circling one another. They did not avert their gaze, yet neither did they challenge. Their silence was not submission. It was something else, something that unsettled even the advisors who tried not to stare. When the final ritual began, silence swept the galaxy's gathering. The bier began to ascend, rising on invisible currents of planetary energy, until Aurelian's body floated above the palace spires. The storm outside swelled, winds shrieking through the bone towers, lightning cracking across the black heavens. It was said that when a monarch of Archi was laid to rest, the planet itself bled out its grief. But this grief felt different. It was not merely the mourning of a world for its king. It was the trembling of history as it shifted its axis. The eldest heir, Prince Veilor, stepped forward. His voice was iron, practiced, trained to echo across legions. Behold the body of Aurelian, the 47th, the breaker of chains, the silent anvil. He ruled not with words, but with will. He bent empires into obedience, shattered tyrants, forged peace through strength. Today, the bier rises, but tomorrow a crown must fall upon the brow of a successor. His siblings stirred. Some nodded. Some clenched fists. Some smirked behind masks of composure. The advisors exchanged wary glances. Succession in the house of Archi was not inheritance, it was a crucible. Aurelian had left no single chosen heir. He had left a warning instead, and that warning hung unspoken among them. Fear humanity. The humans made no speech. They remained silent. But silence itself is a kind of power. As Veilor's words thundered through the chamber, the human stillness seemed to hollow them. Where the princes and princesses sought to amplify their voices, the humans diminished themselves, and yet the eyes of many dignitaries strayed toward them, drawn by that very restraint. For in a hall of conquerors, silence was the rarest defiance. On the second night of mourning, after the bier had reached its highest point in the heavens, the heirs convened once more. The chamber where they met was carved deep within the Leviathan bones. its walls humming with the echoes of the storm. Flames from braziers cast restless shadows across their armor. The air was heavy with tension. "This must end swiftly," declared Veilor. "The longer we wait, the more our rivals circle. The throne must be seized." Princess Zira folded her arms. Her eyes gleamed sharp as obsidian. "Seized, yes, but by whom? You presume yourself, brother, but the throne bows to strength, not seniority." Father's words meant nothing. "Humanity, a distraction? Let us carve our destiny in steel, not riddles." Her younger brother Keithus leaned forward, his grin wolfish. "I say we make an example. Let the galaxy see blood at our father's funeral, a duel for succession witnessed by all. The victor earns the crown," murmurs rose. Some agreed. Others warned it would fracture the realm before it was secured. The advisors tried to counsel patience, but their voices were drowned in the storm of ambition. And always, above their bickering, the whisper lingered in memory. They kill kings, but they raise leaders. Beyond the chamber, in the dim corridors of the palace, the humans walked in silence. They did not scheme, did not conspire, did not challenge. They simply moved among the gathered species, listening. Their presence unsettled the warriors of Arkai, who were used to dominance displayed, not hidden. One human, a woman with dark eyes that seemed older than the stars, paused before the bier. She whispered words no one else heard. Her lips barely moved, yet her expression carried a gravity that felt heavier than the storm. An insectoid chieftain nearby noticed her, and for the first time in centuries lowered his head, not to a king but to a human stranger. It was a small gesture, but like Aurelian's words, it was a seed. On the third day, as tradition dictated, the bier would release its first pulse. The body of the monarch, fused with planetary energy, would send waves of resonance across Zariah's skies. It was both ritual and omen. The shape of the pulse foretold the fate of the next ruler. A strong, steady pulse promised unity. A fractured, broken one warned of civil war. The galaxy held its breath. When the pulse came, it shook the palace like thunder. Light erupted across the heavens, streaking into rivers of blue and crimson. The air quaked. Dust cascaded from the bones above. Dignitaries staggered beneath the force. The resonance tore across oceans and mountains, echoing through every corner of the world. And then it fractured, not into one stream, into many. The light splintered into jagged paths, branching like broken glass, scattering in all directions. Some shot into the stars themselves, as if fleeing Zariah altogether. The chamber erupted in cries, some of awe, some of dread. Advisors fell to their knees, whispering prayers. The heirs stared upward, their arrogance momentarily pierced by unease. It was not a sign of unity. It was a sign of division. The heirs looked at one another, eyes sharp with suspicion. Already the seeds of rivalry sprouted thorns, and among them, unnoticed in the uproar, the humans stood unmoving. Their gazes lifted to the fractured light with no fear, no surprise, only a quiet recognition, as though they had seen it before, as though they had expected it. The galaxy's dignitaries began to murmur. A shattered omen. The heirs will tear each other apart. The throne of Arkai will bleed. Alliances shifted in whispers. Old enemies recalculated their chances. Predators scented opportunity. But one phrase kept surfacing, whispered from advisor to priest, from priest to emissary, from emissary to warlord: fear humanity. For the omen had not broken when they entered, but the humans had. That night, as lightning raged and heirs sharpened their blades against one another, the humans gathered in silence at the base of the palace. They did not pray to the bier. They did not speak of crowns. They spoke only to one another, in voices so low the storm nearly swallowed them. And those who watched from afar could not help but feel the weight of it. The storm belonged to the heirs. The silence belonged to the humans, and soon the silence would prove louder than the storm. The fractured crown, the omen of the fractured pulse, lingered over Zariah like a curse. For 3 nights and 3 days the skies had not cleared, rivers of splintered light still scarring the heavens, their colors shifting like wounds that refused to heal. Every creature, every dignitary, every heir saw in those broken lines a reflection of the throne's uncertain future. The heirs, once bound in a show of ritual unity, now eyed each other as predators do in the dark, waiting, calculating, circling. The bier of their father glowed above, but already the glow of his authority dimmed in their hearts. Without Aurelian, the throne was no longer an inheritance. It was prey. The great hall of Leviathan bones became an arena of whispers and ambition. Prince Veilor, eldest and proudest, drew supporters from among the military elite. His voice thundered in promises of conquest. The galaxy would not be allowed to sense weakness. His strength, his armies, his unbroken line of victories, these would secure the throne. Princess Zira, fierce and cunning, wove her web differently. She moved like a blade through silk, subtle and sharp. Where Veilor declared, she whispered. Where he threatened, she seduced. To her, the fractured pulse was no curse, it was an opportunity. She told her allies, "The throne is not broken. It is reshaped. Not one crown, but many crowns, and I will gather them all." The younger siblings watched, each weighing their chance. Some aligned with Veilor, others with Zira. A few dreamed of seizing the throne for themselves, though none dared voice it aloud. But as they schemed, the humans remained silent. Every empire has its own way of mourning, but humanity's quietness unsettled the heirs most. At meals where alien delegates roared with laughter or clashed in ritual chants, the humans ate sparingly, speaking only in whispers among themselves. At gatherings, they did not join the contests of rhetoric or duel in ceremonial sparring rings. They simply observed, eyes restless, absorbing, weighing. The heirs mocked them openly. "See how they huddle like prey," Veilor said to his soldiers. "No crowns, no chains, no fire in their blood. They are sheep wandering into the den of wolves." Yet the advisors of the court were less certain. They remembered Aurelian's final breath, his trembling whisper, "Fear humanity," and the fractured omen above the bier gnawed at their souls. On the 5th day, the contest for succession began, not by declaration, but by inevitability. It started with a duel between Kethis, the wolfish younger brother and Veilor's favored general. Kethis, laughing, demanded blood to honor their father's memory. The general accepted. Before the galaxy's eyes, under the shadow of the bier, blades clashed. It was brutal, swift. Kethis moved like fire, reckless, wild, unstoppable. The general, disciplined and precise, matched him strike for strike until one mistake, one flicker of arrogance opened his chest. Kethis' blade sank deep. The general fell, blood soaking into the ceremonial stones. The hall erupted in cries, some of triumph, others of dread. The heirs smirked, watching the galaxy weigh the spectacle. But the humans did not cheer. They did not even flinch. They merely watched as though cataloging the moment. And in their silence, it felt less like indifference and more like judgment. That night, the bier pulsed again. This time, the resonance carried not unity, not division, but dissonance. The light fractured, then clashed against itself, sparks tearing through the storm. The sound was not a hum, but a scream. The heirs awoke to it, some shaken, others emboldened. To many, it felt like a call to arms, and so they began to move their pieces. Veilor rallied the captains of fleets. "When my father's bier descends, I will be crowned," he declared. "And those who resist will kneel in blood," Zira whispered among envoys. "The eldest thinks the throne is his by right. Let him take it by steel. I will take it by loyalty." The younger heirs, torn between, began to fracture into camps. The advisors despaired, for they saw Aurelion's empire bending toward civil war even before the bier was laid to rest. And always, the humans watched. One night, as the storm howled above, the humans were seen in the archives of the palace, walking among the crystal tablets where the history of Arkai was carved. They touched nothing, but their eyes traced the lines of conquest, the records of blood, the coronations of kings. A priest approached them uneasy. "Why do you study our dead?" he asked. The human with dark eyes turned, her voice quiet. "Because the dead tell us more than the living." The priest frowned. "What do you seek?" The human's gaze lifted toward the bier glowing faintly above. Her answer was almost a whisper. "To understand why your king feared us." The priest said nothing, for he too wondered. On the 7th day, the galaxy gathered again in the Great Hall for the bier's descent. The body of Aurelian would return to the earth, merging with the core of Zariah, his essence feeding the planet that birthed his dynasty. Tradition demanded unity at this moment, a final show of strength to the stars. But unity was gone. The heirs stood apart, their camps divided, their glances edged with suspicion. Dignitaries leaned forward, eager to witness the fracture of the great house. The bier began to lower. The storm outside roared, winds tearing across oceans, lightning splitting the mountains. The body of Aurelian, draped in shrouds of light, descended slowly into the chamber. The heirs approached from different sides as though already contesting the throne. Hands rested on weapons. Words sharpened into daggers. The advisors prayed for restraint. The dignitaries whispered wagers. The storm built to a howl, and then the beer stopped. It froze above the ground, its glow flickering. The storm outside cut off, silenced, as though the world itself held its breath. The fractured light above wavered, twisting into shapes unseen, shifting. Gathering gasps rippled through the hall. The light converged, not on the heirs, not on the advisors, not on the dignitaries. It fell upon the humans. In an instant, the hall erupted. Cries of disbelief, fury, fear. Some called it blasphemy, others a sign. The heirs roared in outrage, weapons half-drawn, but the humans did not move. They stood still, eyes raised toward the light falling upon them. They neither embraced nor rejected it. They only endured it, as though it had always been inevitable. For the bier of the last king had chosen its witnesses, and in that silent moment, Aurelian's final words returned to every mind. Every soul, every heart, they kill kings, but they raise leaders. The contest of heirs. The bier's fractured light still clung to the humans when the hall erupted into chaos. Shouts echoed beneath the Leviathan arches, weapons half-drawn, banners trembling in the storm that had suddenly stilled. The heirs' voices cut through the uproar, each fueled by rage, fear, and ambition. "Blasphemy," roared Veilor, his hand upon the hilt of his father's ceremonial blade. "The bier has faltered, nothing more. The throne is ours, not theirs." Sira's laughter was cold and sharp, carrying above the noise. "Do you not see, brother? This is the omen." Father's words fulfilled. Humanity, their weakness is their strength. Even the bier bends toward them. The younger heirs joined the uproar, some echoing Veilor's fury, others whispering that perhaps Sira was right. The advisors, pale with dread, tried to quiet the hall, but their voices drowned beneath the storm of clashing ambitions. And still, the humans stood silent. The light from the bier faded at last, but its memory lingered. Every eye in the hall had seen it. The glow of Aurelian's essence, his planetary bond, falling not upon his children but upon strangers. No denial, no fury could erase that truth. The dignitaries carried it like fire back to their fleets, whispering among themselves. The throne trembles. Humanity rises. That night the palace split. Veilor summoned his generals, demanding loyalty sealed in blood. He promised war, not ritual. "The throne will not be given," he declared. "It will be taken." Sira moved with shadows. She gathered envoys, diplomats, and emissaries, speaking not of conquest but of legacy. "Aurelian is gone," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "But his warning remains. To fear humanity is not to submit to them, it is to learn from them. I will not wear my father's crown. I will forge a new one." Her words seeded doubt among Veilor's allies. Already cracks appeared in his wall of power. The younger heirs, hungry but untested, began weaving their own plots. Kethis, blood-drunk from his earlier duel, sought to challenge Veilor directly. Others whispered of alliances in secret, hoping to snatch the throne while their elder siblings tore each other apart. The Palace of Bones, once a cathedral of unity, had become a den of knives. The humans did not flee. They did not speak. They simply remained. But silence, when surrounded by fury, grows heavier than thunder. The dignitaries who watched began to shift. Some predators and warlords saw humanity's stillness as weakness, proof they were unworthy of the bier's light. But others, priests, diplomats, philosophers, saw something different. Where the heirs fought to seize, the humans endured to receive. Where the heirs shouted, they listened, and already whispers began to ripple. Perhaps the bier did not choose a king, but a leader. On the 9th day of mourning, the storm broke again. This time it was not ritual, it was war. It began with Veilor. His fleets descended into Zoraya's orbit, black hulls blotting out the suns. From the palace towers, the people of the world looked upward and saw their skies filled with iron. His message was simple: obedience or annihilation. The palace shook with alarm. Dignitaries scattered, envoys fled to their ships, guards rallied along the bone walls. Sira stood at the balcony watching her brother's fleet circle like vultures. Her smile was cold. "Let him try," she whispered, for she had allies of her own. From the oceans rose vessels clad in living coral, their weapons grown from bioluminescent reefs. From the mountains came fleets of insectoid allies, their wings humming like storms as their warships formed swarms of steel. Zira had promised them partnership, not subjugation, and for now they answered. Above Zoraya, the sky cracked into factions, Veilor's iron legions against Zira's woven alliances, brothers and sisters choosing sides, advisors praying in vain, and through it all the beer still hovered, Aurelian's body glowing faintly above the chaos, as though mourning not his death but his children's blindness. The first strikes fell not upon armies but upon symbols. Veilor's ships targeted the coral vessels, tearing them with plasma fire. Zira's allies retaliated, swarms ripping into Veilor's iron hulls, filling the skies with burning wreckage. From the ground, the people of Zoraya watched as the heavens bled. In the palace below, Kethis seized his chance. He stormed the hall with warriors loyal to his name, blades drawn, eyes wild with hunger. "If the skies fall, then the throne is mine," he roared, charging toward the dais beneath the bier. Blood spilled across the ceremonial stones. Guards clashed with guards. Siblings turned against siblings, the hall becoming an echo of the war raging above. And still, the humans did not move. They stood at the edge of the hall, eyes calm, faces unreadable. As heirs slaughtered one another, as dignitaries fled, as the storm tore the palace apart, the humans remained. They neither claimed the throne nor defended it, yet their stillness became unbearable. One of the younger heirs, blood spattered across his face, turned upon them. His blade trembled in his hand, his voice cracked with fury. "Why do you stand there? Speak, act! Claim what the beer gave you, or die silent like cowards." The humans only looked at him. Their silence answered louder than any words. The air snarled and lunged, but the storm above intervened. The beer pulsed. A shockwave of light tore through the hall, hurling combatants to the ground. Weapons fell. Fires dimmed. For one terrible, breathtaking moment, the voice of the dead king returned, not in words but in force. The hall glowed with his essence, his presence pressing down upon all within. And when the light faded, all eyes turned again, not to Veilor, not to Zira, not to Kethis, to the humans. In that silence, the heirs finally understood their father's words. He had not feared humanity for their armies. He had not feared them for their weapons. He had feared them for something deeper, something his children, with all their crowns and blades, could not grasp. Leadership. For the beer had chosen not those who demanded, but those who endured. Not those who shouted, but those who listened. Not those who sought crowns, but those who carried the burden of others without being asked. The heirs still refused to believe. Their pride burned too fiercely. But the galaxy had seen, the dignitaries had seen, the people of Zoraya had seen, and once seen, the truth cannot be unseen. As the skies burned with war and the palace shook with bloodshed, the humans remained the quiet center of the storm. And somewhere beyond the veil of death, Aurelian's spirit whispered once more into the ears of his heirs, "They kill kings, but they raise leaders. You, my children, will learn too late. But the galaxy already learns." The siege of silence, the skies of Zoraya were no longer skies. They were fire. Veilor's iron fleets thundered above, raining plasma upon coral vessels and insectoid swarms. Zira's alliances retaliated, weaving their living ships through the storm, each clash scattering debris across the heavens like shattered constellations. The planet itself seemed to tremble beneath the weight of the civil war, as though mourning what its monarch had once united. But the people of Zoraya, the countless millions who had lived under Aurelian's long reign, did not look to the heirs for salvation. Their eyes turned elsewhere, toward the humans. It began quietly, as all revolutions do. While heirs sharpened blades and generals marshaled fleets, the humans walked among the common folk. They did not promise crowns, nor power, nor conquest. They spoke only of survival. They gathered the frightened, the displaced, the broken. They shared food when stores ran low, patched wounds when healers fled, offered words when silence would have crushed. The people, long taught to bow only to crowns, found themselves bowing instead to those who asked for nothing. And so the silence of humanity spread like a tide. The palace of Leviathan bones had become a fortress, its skeletal arches blazing with fire. The heirs turned it into their battlefield, each seeking to claim the throne beneath the bier. Kethis led raids through its corridors, his laughter echoing as blood stained the ceremonial stones. The younger siblings lurked in shadows, striking where they could, carving out fragments of power from the ruins. Advisors, once proud, cowered in chambers, praying to gods who no longer listened. Above them, Aurelian's bier still floated, his body untouched by the chaos, his glow dimming with each pulse of war, and always. The humans stood beneath it. They did not defend it nor claim it. They simply endured, their stillness becoming an unspoken defiance to the madness around them. The siege began when Veilor commanded his fleets to descend upon the palace itself. "Break the bones of Leviathans," he thundered, "and scatter my father's heirs among the dust. The throne is mine alone." His warships roared downward, engines screaming, their shadows swallowing the palace spires. Plasma cannons lit the skies. The ground quaked as blasts tore chunks from the skeletal walls, scattering shards of glowing bone into the storm. Syra's allies swarmed to defend, insectoid ships darting through fire, coral vessels rising from the seas. The heavens became a cage of burning wreckage, and below, within the palace, the people huddled. Thousands of servants, workers, and wanderers trapped in the heart of the storm. It was the humans who found them. The corridors of the palace filled with screams as fire rained from above. The humans moved swiftly, gathering the people, guiding them through passages long forgotten, carved into the bones themselves. Where heirs fought for power, the humans carved paths for survival. Where soldiers shed blood for thrones, the humans bled quietly for strangers. And the people saw. They saw not princes or princesses, not heirs or generals, but fragile, crownless creatures who carried them through fire. And their hearts, long chained to a monarchy of power, began to stir with something new. Not fear. Not loyalty, trust. The siege raged for days. The palace groaned under bombardment. Leviathan arches cracked, raining ivory shards upon the courtyards. Fire spread unchecked. Rivers of refugees poured from shattered halls, and everywhere, whispers spread. "The humans saved me. The humans gave us bread. The humans carried my child from the flames." The heirs raged when they heard. To them, humanity's acts were insults, challenges to their rightful claim. Veilor swore he would cut their throats. Zira smirked, pretending to use their rising influence for her schemes. But no matter how they spun it, the truth had rooted in the people. While kings fought for crowns, leaders walked among them. One night, during a lull in the siege, the bier pulsed again. The fractured light filled the ruins of the palace, scattering across rubble and ash. But this time it did not fall upon the heirs, nor upon their generals, nor even upon the advisors who prayed desperately for guidance. It fell upon the humans once more. But unlike before, it did not glow faint. It burned. The light wrapped around them like armor, like fire, like destiny. The people who witnessed it gasped, some falling to their knees, others crying out in awe. And though the humans did not move, did not claim, did not speak, the silence around them became unbearable. For it was no longer silence. It was authority. Words spread faster than fire. Across Zoraya, whispers became chants. In streets, in shelters, in burned-out halls, the people spoke with one voice. The bier chooses. The bier sees. The bier knows. They did not call the humans kings. They did not crown them. But they began to follow, not because of power, not because of blood, because they wanted to. This, more than any battle, broke the heirs. Veilor raged, his fleets scorching whole cities in desperation, shouting to the stars that fear would force loyalty. But the more he burned, the more the people turned from him. Zira schemed, weaving promises of peace and prosperity if the humans bent to her will. But the humans bent to no one. They simply kept walking, saving, enduring, and the people bent toward them instead. The younger heirs grew desperate, clawing for scraps of loyalty, their pride curdling into bitterness, and above it all, Aurelian's bier glowed faintly, as if watching, waiting, mourning. At last, the heirs did what they had always feared. They united, not to honor their father, not to claim the throne together, but to destroy the one thing they now hated more than each other: humanity. Let them be erased. Veilor spat, his voice a snarl. Let their ashes prove the bier was blind. For once, Zyra whispered, we agree. And so the heirs, fractured by ambition, found unity in vengeance. Their armies turned not against each other, but against the crownless strangers who stood too still, too quiet, too unbreakable. The siege of the palace became the hunt of humanity, but the people of Zariah had seen too much. When the heir's armies came, they did not find fragile humans alone. They found walls of bodies, workers, farmers, healers, children standing between. They found voices shouting not of crowns but of choice. They found loyalty not demanded but given freely. The heirs had their armies. The humans had the people. And in that moment, the heirs began to understand the terror their father had whispered with his dying breath. They kill kings, but they raise leaders. The fire and the people, the air over Zariah thickened with ash and defiance. Once the skies of this world had been rivers of starlight and bioluminescence, constellations mirrored in the seas below. But war had stripped them bare, burning the heavens into a furnace. Flames no longer rose as singular pillars, they rolled like storms, swallowing spires, forests, and bone palaces alike. The heirs believed this fire would break the people. Instead, it forged them. When Veilor's armies swept into the streets, banners blazing with the sigil of a dying crown, they expected trembling knees and bowed heads. What they found were farmers standing in doorways with spears carved from shattered beams. They found healers refusing to abandon their wounded, mothers clutching children not as shields but as promises, and men who had never held blades gripping them with unshakable steadiness. And beside them, always beside them, stood the humans. They did not command. They did not dictate. They walked into fire and never left the people's side. And so when the soldiers of the heirs shouted demands, the response was not submission. It was resistance. The first clash was not glorious. It was not the kind of battle sung by poets. It was desperate, jagged, and raw. Veilor's soldiers marched in perfect formation, their armor gleaming with forged lightning, their blades humming with plasma. They were trained to crush armies, not defiance. But when they advanced, the streets erupted. From rooftops, children hurled stones that struck with more fury than precision. From alleys, workers wielded hammers like war clubs, the air filled with the roar of voices, not in fear but in fury. And in the heart of it, a single human lifted a broken plank of wood, striking against the soldier's shield. It was not the strength of the blow that mattered. It was the sight, a fragile, crownless being standing against the heir's armies. The people surged. Zira watched from her command tower, her serpentine eyes narrowing as the tide turned. "This is no rebellion," she hissed to her advisors. "This is contagion." She had always known her father's words held venom, but now she tasted the truth of them. Kings inspired obedience. Leaders inspired choice. And choice, once lit, spread like wildfire. So she unleashed fire of her own. Her fleets darkened the skies above the districts where the people gathered, unleashing waves of burning gas that turned streets into rivers of flame. Towers cracked, collapsing upon themselves. The cries of the dying mingled with the roar of destruction. Yet even then, the people did not scatter. They carried one another through smoke. They linked arms against the tide. And the humans were always there, carrying, guiding, enduring. The beer's glow, faint yet steady, followed them like a distant star. Kethis, the savage heir, cared nothing for fleets or strategies. He walked the streets himself, blade in hand, cutting down all who opposed him. His laughter was a storm. He mocked the humans as insects pretending at gods, slashing through anyone who dared call them leaders. Yet for every body he left broken, 10 more rose. Not soldiers, not heirs, but people. And when his blade finally struck a human, piercing frail flesh and spilling fragile blood, something stirred in the crowd. It was not despair. It was rage. The sight of the fallen human, a being who had walked beside them in silence, who had asked nothing and given everything, ignited the people more fiercely than any crown. They surged upon Kethis with bare hands, clawing, striking, tearing. For the first time his laughter faltered. For the first time fear touched his eyes. Even princes bled when the people rose. The palace of Leviathan bones had long been reduced to ruins, yet the beer still floated above its shattered heart. At the height of the people's resistance, when Era's armies clashed with farmers in blood-streaked alleys, the beer pulsed again. Its glow stretched farther this time, touching not only the humans but the people themselves. It draped across mothers holding children, across healers wrapping wounds, across workers lifting debris. And in that glow, the people saw themselves reflected, not as subjects, not as pawns, but as something greater. For centuries they had bent beneath crowns. Now the beer showed them that crowns were not the source of power. They were. Whispers became chants. Chants became roars. Not kings, leaders. Not crowns. Us. We are the beer's light. The heirs heard the cries echoing across the burning world, and for the first time the weight of their father's dying words pressed upon their throats. Phalor redoubled his fury, vowing to break every last voice that rose against him. Cirrus sharpened her venom, plotting to twist the movement into her own puppet rebellion. Kethis swore he would drown the streets in rivers of blood. But the more they raged, the more the people resisted, for fire can burn flesh, but it cannot scorch choice once it has taken root. The funeral of Aurelian was no longer a gathering of mourners. It had become the theater of transformation. The beer, floating above the chaos, had drawn countless refugees, believers, and rebels to its side. They camped beneath its glow, defending it not as a throne but as a symbol. And when the heir's armies came to tear it down, they found not trembling subjects but an ocean of defiance. Thousands stood in silence as the armies approached. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of resolve, and in that silence, the human stepped forward, not to lead, not to command, but simply to stand. The beer's glow draped across them once more. And in the heart of the silence, something shifted. The people no longer whispered about kings. They no longer begged for heirs to guide them. They no longer prayed to crowns for salvation. They looked to the humans, and through them, they looked to themselves. That night, under the smoking skies of Zoraya, the first embers of a new truth blazed to life. Aurelian's last words were no longer prophecy. They were reality. Humanity had not claimed the throne. Humanity had done something far more dangerous. They had taught the people that they did not need a throne at all. The ashes of crowns, the crowns of Zoraya, had always gleamed brightest in firelight. Forged from Leviathan bone and molten stars, they were relics of dynasties past, passed from monarch to monarch, symbols of continuity in a galaxy where nothing endured. Now they lay scattered. When the palace cracked under bombardment, its reliquary vault split open, hurling the crowns of Aurelian's forebears into the dust. They rolled across broken stones, dented, bloodstained, and forgotten. Once whole empires would have killed for them. Now no one stooped to pick them up. The people of Zoraya no longer bowed to crowns. They were bowing to one another. The heirs, each in their fury, saw the crowns lying discarded and understood the weight of their father's warning. For Phalor, it burned like acid. He lifted one crown from the ruins, holding it aloft before his legions, and his voice thundered across the battlefield. This is order. This is lineage. This is blood-made law. But the soldiers who heard him glanced not at the crown but at the people massing in the streets. Farmers with spears, healers with torches, children clutching stones. Behind them the humans stood silent, fragile yet unyielding. And something inside the soldiers' hearts faltered. For order meant little when the people themselves had chosen chaos. Sira, watching from her tower of glass and venom, tried another path. She seized a crown and placed it upon her head, letting its broken weight sink into her serpentine brow. Her voice, soft and silken, slithered into the ears of her allies. The people want leaders. Then let them look upon me. Let them see I am not king but queen reborn. I will promise them freedom, and while they chant, I will hold their chains. Yet when she descended among the crowds, the beer's glow did not bend toward her. It pulsed faintly, drifting past her form as though she were dust. The people's eyes turned instead toward the humans, and through them toward themselves. Her promises dissolved into air. Kethis, never subtle, never patient, strode into the reliquary and smashed the crowns with his blade. Let ashes be thrones, he bellowed, his laughter shaking the bones of the palace. If the beer crowns insects, then I will crown myself in blood. He scattered fragments of crown upon the ground like kindling. His followers knelt, scooping shards as trophies, wearing them as jagged mockeries of coronets. His war cult roared approval, their chants rising with violence. But when they surged into the streets, seeking to drown the people's uprising, they found walls of bodies and voices raised not in worship but defiance. Kethis's ash crowns gleamed in the firelight, but the people did not see rulers. They saw scavengers, and they refused to kneel. The beer pulsed again. Not bright, not blazing, merely steady, like a heartbeat. Its glow rolled across the battlefield, across shattered crowns and broken bones, across soldiers and civilians, heirs and humans alike. And everywhere it touched, it whispered a truth. Power was no longer inherited. It was chosen. The heirs could not endure it. Veilor unleashed storms of plasma from his fleets, vowing to scour whole continents to erase the people's defiance. Zira poisoned rivers, weaving toxins into whispers, hoping to dissolve resistance before it could burn too brightly. Kethis rampaged from city to city, blade dripping with rivers of blood, laughing even as his followers fell one by one. Together, though they loathed one another, they achieved what none had imagined possible. They shattered Zoraya itself. The planet groaned. Oceans boiled where Veilor's fleet struck. Skies blackened with clouds of ash and toxin where Zyra's poison spread. Mountains split beneath Kethis' laughter. Rivers of molten stone carving scars across the land. Zoraya, the jewel of the Leviathan bones, the world their father had ruled for centuries, began to crumble, and yet amid the ruin, the people still stood. They gathered in burned-out squares, clutching one another against the storms. They marched through poisoned rivers, carrying children on their shoulders. They built walls of broken stone and bone, crude fortresses to shield themselves, and through it all the humans remained. Not kings, not generals, not saviors, leaders. By standing beside the people, they became the people. By refusing to command, they taught the people to command themselves. The beer's glow did not anoint them with crowns. It simply reflected what had already begun. The crowns lay in ashes. The people rose in fire. In the seventh night of war, as the heirs unleashed their might upon the last bastion where the people gathered, a great silence fell. Not the silence of fear, the silence of waiting. Tens of thousands stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the beer's faint glow. No weapons gleamed in their hands, only torches, stones, and the unyielding set of their jaws. When the heirs' armies descended upon them, fleets shrieking, poisons flowing, blades screaming, the people did not scatter. They raised their voices as one, not in chants of loyalty, not in prayers to crowns, but in the roar of unity. The sound cracked the air like thunder. Soldiers in the heirs' ranks faltered. Some lowered their weapons. Others broke formation. A few even crossed the line entirely, stepping into the crowd of people they had once sworn to crush. The heirs raged, shouting commands, striking down deserters. But no fury could bind soldiers whose hearts had already shifted, for they no longer feared kings. They had seen leaders. And once seen, the vision could not be forgotten. On that night, beneath burning skies and crumbling mountains, the last crowns of Zoraya turned to dust. The beer hovered above the people, its glow like the last breath of a dying monarch. And though Aurelian's body still lay silent within, his words echoed louder than ever. Fear humanity. They kill kings, but they raise leaders. The heirs, for all their rage, had begun to understand, and understanding was its own kind of death. The children of the beer had always been a symbol of death, a monarch's last journey, a relic of endings. But now, in the ashes of Zoraya, it had become something else. The people no longer came to it in mourning. They came to it in birth. Children gathered beneath its glow, their eyes wide, their faces streaked with ash and tears. They did not remember a time when the skies were not aflame. They did not remember Aurelian's reign or the weight of crowns, or the silence of obedience. They remembered only this: the frail beings who stood beside them when the world burned. Humans. These children carried the beer's glow in their eyes, reflecting it as though it were not light but seed. Wherever they went, others followed. Their laughter, fragile though it was, spread through ruins like sunlight breaking through storm. And the people who had endured so much loss began to see in those children not despair but tomorrow. The heirs could not bear it. Veilor saw the children gathered in burned-out temples and ordered his fleets to scour them with fire. Yet when his cannons roared, his soldiers faltered, refusing to strike. Some even turned their weapons away, unwilling to spill the blood of innocence for a crown that already lay in dust. Sira poisoned wells and whispered that the children carried corruption. that the beer's glow was infection. Yet the people drank deeply from poisoned waters, shielding the little ones with their own bodies, refusing to let her whispers divide them. Kethis stormed villages with his cult, blade dripping, his laughter a madness that shook the ruins. But when he raised his sword above a child's head, the crowd surged upon him, unarmed, tearing his followers apart with hands and teeth, forcing him to retreat howling into the dark. Even the heirs, for all their cruelty, could not unmake what had taken root, for the beer had chosen its children, not heirs of blood, but heirs of light. The people began to gather in secret circles, meeting in caverns, ruins, and forests of bone. They no longer spoke of crowns or dynasties. They spoke of choices: who would grow the crops, who would mend the wounded, who would carry the little ones through the storms. No longer did they wait for decrees from palaces. They decreed for themselves. The humans never sat in those circles as rulers. They sat as one voice among many, but their presence was enough. Their silence carried weight greater than commands. It was not that the people wished to follow humans. It was that, in following them, they had discovered themselves. The heirs, watching from shattered towers, began to unravel. Veilor tore the insignias from his soldier's armor, demanding loyalty not to a broken dynasty but to his fury. Yet the more he shouted, the fewer soldiers remained. Zira retreated into her poisoned sanctuaries, weaving illusions, trying to bind remnants of her followers with promises of immortality. But even whispers could not bind hearts that had glimpsed choice. Kethis grew feral, roaming ruins like a beast, his laughter hollow, his cult dwindling until only echoes followed him. For the first time since their father's death, the heirs were united by one thing only: desperation. The beer pulsed again, but this time, it did not spread faintly across the battlefield. It surged. A wave of light rippled outward, flooding ruins, forests, seas, and skies. The glow wrapped around the people like a mantle, and for the first time, it was not the humans alone who bore its radiance. It was everyone. Children's laughter glowed like embers. Farmers' calloused hands gleamed like forged steel. Healers' weary eyes burned like lanterns in the dark. The beer's light had chosen the people. Not one, not few, but all. In that moment, the people ceased being subjects. They became something else, the children of the beer. When the heirs saw it, they knew crowns no longer mattered. Power had already slipped from their grasp. They could burn cities, poison rivers, slaughter thousands, and still the beer's glow would spread, rooting itself deeper into the will of the people. Their father's last words had become not prophecy, but sentence. Fear humanity. They kill kings, but they raise leaders. And the people, raised into leadership themselves, no longer needed kings at all. The heirs gathered one final time, deep within the ruins of the palace of Leviathan bones. The beer floated above them, its glow pulsing steadily, its silence louder than their rage. Veilor struck the bone walls with his fists until cracks split his skin. Zira's tongue dripped venom as she cursed their father's name. Kethis roared into the night, his laughter twisted into something brittle, but behind their fury lay fear, for they had seen what their father saw. Kings die alone. Leaders live forever in the hearts of those who choose them, and humanity, in its fragile silence, had given the people a choice. The heirs made a pact. If they could not rule Zoraya, then no one would. They would shatter the world itself, rip its bones apart, scatter its people into the void. Better ashes than surrender, better silence than defiance. They would not lose their crowns to humans, they would burn them in fire. The pact was sealed with blood. 3 drops upon the broken throne, and as the beer pulsed faintly above, carrying the body of their father, the heirs turned their gaze to the heart of Zoraya, to the core, the living fire that sustained the world, the pulse that had fed its oceans and skies, the heartbeat that had made its Leviathan bones grow for millennia. If they could not crown themselves, they would extinguish the core, and with it, all of Zoraya. The breaking of worlds. The core of Zoraya was older than crowns, older than dynasties, older even than memory. It was said to be the first fire that lit the planet, a molten heart woven with veins of light, beating in rhythm with the stars. From it the seas had drawn warmth, the Leviathan bones their strength, the skies their shimmer. For millennia, monarchs had sworn to guard it. For millennia, no hand had dared touch it. Now 3 heirs marched upon it, and the planet trembled. The descent into the core was a journey through the marrow of Zoraya itself. Veilor led with fury, his armor cracked and smoking, his fists still dripping blood from shattered walls. He looked not at the beauty of the glowing caverns, but at their fragility, imagining them reduced to rubble. Sira slithered behind, her eyes glinting like blades, her whispers weaving through the shadows. Better silence than choice. Better void than betrayal. She poured venom into every word, as though convincing herself the act was necessary. Kethis came last, his laughter echoing in the tunnels, wild and jagged. He licked molten stone from his blade as though tasting the heart of the world already. "Let it burn," he howled. "Let its screams be my crown." Together they reached the core. It was not a chamber. It was a cosmos. The core stretched beneath them like a sea of fire, a pulsing ocean of light and molten currents. Its glow painted their faces in crimson, gold, and white. Arcs of plasma rose like waves, crashing silently against the cavern walls. The heirs stood at the brink of it and felt their father's presence, faint and lingering, woven into the very fire. For a moment, silence pressed upon them. Even Kethis' laughter stilled. And then Veilor lifted his hand. Break it. On the surface, the people felt it. The ground shuddered. Skies flickered with veins of red lightning. Oceans rose in heaving tides, slamming against shattered shores. Forests of bone cracked, their luminous trunks groaning in agony. The people gathered in fear, their voices rising not in chants but in questions. What was happening? What had the heirs done? The humans stood among them, their faces turned downward, as if hearing a heartbeat through the soil. They knew before anyone else, the core was dying. And if the core died, so would Zoraya. Panic spread. Some urged flight to take ships into the void and abandon the world. Others wept, clinging to ruins, unwilling to leave their ancestors' bones. But it was the children who silenced the fear. They stood beneath the bier, their eyes glowing faintly with its light, and they spoke with a calmness that cut through panic. If the heirs kill our world, then we must save it. Their words carried no authority, no crowns weighed upon their heads. And yet the people listened, for leadership no longer wore crowns, it wore truth. The bier pulsed once more, not faintly, not softly, fiercely. Its glow shot into the sky, a beacon blazing across smoke and ruin. The people turned toward it as though it were a sun. And though Aurelian's body still lay within, silent and unmoving, his last words seemed to burn through the air. They kill kings, but they raise leaders. And the people understood. They were no longer waiting for heirs to decide the fate of their world. They would decide it themselves. The march to the core began, farmers carrying spears of bone, healers bearing satchels of herbs, children clutching stones and torches. Thousands poured into the tunnels, their footsteps like thunder rolling through marrow. At their side walked the humans, silent, unarmed, yet glowing faintly beneath the bier's light. The heirs had gone below to destroy the world. The people were going below to save it. Deep in the core, the heirs had begun their work. Veilor summoned storms of plasma, hurling bolts into the molten heart. Zira unleashed toxins brewed from her own blood, pouring them into the fire to rot it from within. Kethis plunged his blade into the core itself, laughing as sparks erupted, scorching his skin. The core screamed. Its light faltered, dimming into sickly hues. The cavern walls cracked, raining shards of glowing bone. Rivers boiled upward, flooding passages with steam. Zoraya was dying, and then the people arrived. They poured into the cavern, filling ledges, tunnels, and broken walkways, their voices echoing louder than the air's destruction. Veilor turned, fury blazing in his eyes. Zira hissed, venom dripping from her lips. Kethis laughed, blade still embedded in the core, but the people did not falter. They surged forward, not as an army, but as a tide. The heirs had power, the people had numbers, and numbers once awakened are not easily broken. The battle for the core was unlike any before. Soldiers loyal to the heirs clashed with their own kin, torn between obedience and choice. Poisonous mists battled against chants of defiance. Blades clanged against tools turned into weapons. Children hurled stones into the fire, striking not flesh but the illusions of fear that had bound their world. And in the midst of it all, the humans stood at the edge of the core, gazing into its dying light. They did not strike. They did not command. They simply endured, and in their endurance they became a mirror. The people saw themselves reflected in that silence, and their courage grew sharper than any blade. The heirs fought with the madness of desperation. Veilor crushed dozens with his fists, roaring that blood was destiny. Zira wove illusions, trying to turn brother against sister, mother against child. Kethis carved through crowds, his laughter echoing across the cavern like thunder. But every time one fell, two more rose. Not soldiers, not heirs, people. And slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. The core weakened, flickered like a dying star. The humans stepped closer, their forms silhouetted against the molten fire. For the first time, they spoke. Not commands, not decrees, but a single truth. The core lives if we live together. The people heard, and their voices rose in answer. They linked arms, forming chains across ledges, hauling one another from molten pits, shielding children with their bodies, pushing back the heirs with nothing but will. The core pulsed faintly in rhythm with their voices, as though listening. And then, for the first time, it answered. Its light flared, not from the heirs' destruction, but from the unity of the people. Every shout, every sacrifice, every act of courage fed the fire. The core began to heal, its glow burning brighter with each heartbeat of defiance. The heirs struck harder, but the more they struck, the more the people resisted. The core was no longer theirs to command. It had chosen its children. The cavern shook violently, molten rivers bursting upward, shards of bone falling like rain. The heirs screamed their fury into the fire, but above their rage, above the clash of battle, one truth had already been written. Zoraya would not die with its kings. It would live with its people. The fall of the heirs, the core burned like a newborn star. Its light rose in surges, washing over the cavern walls, painting every stone in molten brilliance. The air was thick with heat and smoke, with cries of battle, with the scent of blood and fire. Yet through the chaos, one truth pulsed steady. The heirs were faltering. For all their fury, they were still only three. And against them, the world itself had risen. Veilor was the first to weaken. His fists struck with the strength of mountains, each blow shaking ledges and sending soldiers tumbling. But his armor had been shattered in the march, his flesh burned by the core's fire. Each movement was slower, heavier, as though the weight of every life he had crushed pressed down on his shoulders. Still, he roared, defiant. "I am the hammer. I am the storm. You cannot—" The words cut short as a tide of farmers surged at him, their tools striking not to kill but to drive him back. They swarmed him like the sea, their chants drowning his roar. For the first time, Veilor staggered, and the core dimmed in response to his weakness. Sierra moved like smoke, weaving illusions that bent the eye and clouded the mind. She whispered venom into ears, turning brother against brother, sowing panic where unity had begun to bloom. But the humans stood in her way. They did not shout. They did not strike. They simply held fast, their calm like a wall no shadow could penetrate. Her illusions wrapped around them and fell apart like mist in sunlight. The people watching realized the trickery for what it was. One by one, they closed their ears to her whispers, their hearts to her poison. Her power unraveled, and for the first time, Zira's voice broke, not in a whisper but in a scream. Kethis fought on, relentless. His blade was a comet, burning arcs across the cavern, each swing cutting down those who dared stand before him. His laughter still rang, but it cracked at the edges, too sharp, too hollow. For every life he took, 10 more rose. Mothers with torches, children with stones, soldiers who had abandoned crowns for kin. They pressed in, not with weapons alone, but with sheer defiance. And Kethis, drenched in blood and fire, felt the weight of their eyes. Not fear, not awe, condemnation. He roared louder as if to drown it out, but the sound was swallowed by the voices of thousands rising against him. The heir who thought himself eternal began to look small. The core shifted. No longer a wounded thing. It surged with the rhythm of the people's defiance. Its light lashed outward, wrapping the cavern in blazing arcs. Where unity stood, the fire healed. Where division lingered, it cracked. The people began to chant, not words of crowns or heirs, but of survival, of unity, of life. Each chant struck the heirs harder than any blade. The core no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the many. Veilor fell first. The tide overwhelmed him, driving him to his knees. He swung until his fist broke, until bone cracked beneath the weight of his own fury. But the people pressed closer, shouting not of vengeance but of release. When he fell into the molten light, the core did not consume him with fire. It dissolved him into silence. Zira followed. Her illusions shattered like glass, her whispers lost in the storm of chants. Desperate, she clawed at the core itself, begging it to listen. But the core answered with truth, not deceit. It flared once and she was gone, her voice smothered in brilliance. Only Kethis remained. He fought like a dying star, every strike a scream, every laugh a sob. His blade cut rivers into the cavern floor, his fury carving fire into stone. He stood against thousands, and still he raged, but the people did not yield. They circled him, their chants rising higher, louder, until even the core echoed their voices. His laughter faltered. His blade trembled, and then the children stepped forward. The same children who had stood beneath the bier, glowing faintly with its light. They did not lift weapons. They only held out their hands. Enough. The word broke him. His blade slipped from his grasp, vanishing into molten fire. His laughter dissolved into silence, and the core, with one final pulse, drew him into its light. The last air was gone. Silence fell. The cavern no longer trembled. The molten fire calmed, flowing in slow, steady currents. The core pulsed gently, its glow softer now, no longer screaming but breathing. The people stood in awe, their faces lit by the glow of a world reborn. Above them, the bier that had carried Aurelian's body pulsed one last time. Its light lifted, rising like smoke into the air, and for a moment it hung above them, shimmering, eternal, before dissolving into the core itself. The king was gone, but his last words had been fulfilled. The people climbed from the core together. Farmers and soldiers, mothers and children, even those who had once served the heirs. No crowns weighed upon their heads, no titles carved into their skin. Yet as they walked beneath the healing sky, something greater than crowns bound them, a choice made together. The humans walked among them, silent as always, their eyes fixed on the horizon. They had not killed the heirs. The people had, and in that truth, the meaning of Aurelian's warning rang clear. Fear humanity, they kill kings, but they raise leaders. On the surface, the world had begun to heal. The storms that had torn the skies were fading. The ocean stilled, their tides sinking back to shore. The forests of bone glowed faintly as though remembering the fire that had birthed them. And in the heart of it all, the people stood not beneath a throne, not before a monarch, but beside one another. They had no king now, they had something greater, a future that belonged to them. The new dawn. The sun rose slowly over Zariah, not with fire but with gentleness. For the first time in generations, it rose without being forced to fight its way through storms. The skies were clear, washed in hues of violet and gold, as if the heavens themselves wished to honor the dead and bless the living. The land was scarred. Craters marred once verdant plains, rivers ran black with soot, and the towering forests of bone stood fractured, their luminous bark charred. Yet beneath the ruin was something new, silent, deep and clean, the kind that comes after endless thunder. Zariah was breathing again. The people emerged from the core's depths with eyes still glowing faintly from its light. They carried no banners, no crowns, no chains. They carried only each other. Farmers with soot on their faces leaned on the shoulders of soldiers. Children held hands with elders. The wounded were borne not by servants but by friends. The bier was gone. The heirs were gone. What remained was a people without kings. And yet, in the marrow of their bones, they knew they were not leaderless. In the ruins of the capital, The humans stood waiting. They had not fought as the heirs had fought, nor ruled as kings had ruled. They had endured. And in enduring, they had revealed the truth of leadership, not command, but reflection. The people gathered before them, not kneeling, not bowing, but simply standing, waiting. And for the first time since their arrival, the humans spoke at length. Your father's last words were truth, they said, their voices like many woven into one. Kings die, leaders rise. A leader is not born of blood, but of choice. You have chosen. The core has chosen with you. Their words carried no weight of decree. They carried recognition. And the people wept, not in grief alone, but in release. The days that followed were unlike any Zariah had known. Without heirs to demand fealty, the people began to gather in circles. At first they met in ruined halls, sitting on broken stones. Then in the fields where the soil had cracked from fire but still remembered the shape of roots. Farmers, healers, warriors, children, all spoke. At first their voices clashed like storm winds, each shouting to be heard. But slowly a rhythm emerged. They listened. They weighed. They decided not by command, by consent. The core pulsed brighter each time, and so the first councils were born. The humans did not stay at the center. They moved among the people, listening, observing, answering when asked, but never ruling. They were a mirror still, reflecting what the people already carried within themselves. Some feared them still. Be wary of those who kill kings. But fear turned to respect, then to gratitude. For the humans never sought crowns, they sought only truth. Generations later, elders would tell their children the tale of the night the heirs fell. They would speak of Valor's fury, Sira's whispers, Kethis' laughter, and of the thousands who stood against them with nothing but courage. But above all, they would remember the bier that had carried Aurelian's body, glowing like a sun even in death. They would remember his last words, whispered not to heirs but to a world. Fear humanity. They kill kings, but they raise leaders. And in that whisper was the seed of their rebirth. Not all scars healed easily. Some still longed for crowns, for the certainty of command. Some whispered that the core would burn brighter if ruled by a single hand. Small wars flared, voices clashed, blood was spilled. But each time the councils rose again, stronger. For once a people taste the weight of their own choice. The hunger for chains never holds them long. And slowly, Zariah shifted. The core's fire grew steady, no longer surging in anger, but flowing like breath. Rivers cleared, forests regrew, skies opened wider. The world was alive again. The humans remained, though their number never grew. They walked among villages, sat in circles, helped build homes from broken stone. They taught no dogma, spoke no decrees. When asked why they stayed, they always answered the same. Because you are learning what we already learned. And though none could say exactly what that meant, the people understood. For leadership was no longer bound to crowns or heirs. It was bound to all who chose to stand. On the 1000th sunrise after the heirs' fall, the people gathered again at the mouth of the core. They did not descend this time. They stood at its edge looking into the steady fire, and offered nothing but silence. In that silence, they felt their king's last words alive still, woven into the light. Aurelian had not lived to see his prophecy fulfilled, but his people had. The new dawn was not marked by coronations, nor by banners unfurled. It was marked by a simple truth that spread from village to village, from child to elder. No crown would ever rule them again. They would rule themselves. And in the fire of the core, in the memory of the bier, in the whispers of the humans who had walked among them, the prophecy remained eternal. Fear humanity. They kill kings, but they raise leaders. Zariah had lost its last monarch, and in doing so, it had found its first future.